My name is Mini Tangaswamy. Well, thank you for Product School. I like events where PMs get to meet each other, compare notes, and kind of figure out what everyone's doing in their area. I will be talking about what it takes to succeed as a payments PM. And when I was thinking about preparing for this talk, I was like, typically there's how do you keep like the audience's interest keep ongoing from the start. There's people usually ask a bunch of questions that gets hand raises. And if I ask this group, how many of you do payments, instead of like, how many of you buy things, instead of like hand raises, you'd most probably just stare at me and then think I live under a rock, right? And even if I changed the question, I said, how many of you buy things on the internet, buy products and services, I'll still kind of get the same reaction. And that's basically because payment is ubiquitous. We do this day in and out. It's also an area we just expect it to work. No matter if I go to Walgreens and I like using Apple Pay at Walgreens, if I use that, or if I'm buying something online from an e-commerce merchant, the expectation is the experience should be reliable, it's secure, and that it's frictionless. So as a payment PM, those are some of the three things. Those are specifically the three things that you focus on, and you make sure that the experience is so simple that people even don't know and realize the complexity behind it. So we have around 30 to 45 minutes here, and I want to focus on talk about why payments is exciting, what some of the inherent challenges of being a payments PM is, and also the last thing that I think most of you might be interested in is what do you need to have to be successful as a payments PM. So let's actually cut to the chase, right? Let's get to the three skills. I'll kind of touch upon these during the different parts of today's talk. But this is what I see as the top three skills. I don't think there is any specific domain knowledge. And I think this applies a lot to PMing in general, but I'll call out why some of these things stand out specifically for payments PM. The first one's being able to be really detailed oriented, but also at the same time, stepping back and understanding an entire payments flow and experience, and knowing and tying that with the detailed feature that you're building. The second is having empathy. I will talk about empathy, about not just user empathy, but using the empathy super skills that you have to applying it to your partners that you work with. And the third is learning. Again, I'll talk about how does learning apply in sense of payments. A little bit about myself. I've been doing product management for around 10 years. A large part of that I spent in Wells Fargo, which is one of the largest banks in the country. I'm an engineer by background. I started my first job out of school was being an engineer for a telecom startup in India. I then did tech consulting for a very short period of time. And I joined Wells Fargo right after I graduated I finished my postgrad and joined the organization. And even though I was at a very large financial institution for almost 7-8 years, every 2 years I did something different. And I didn't realize it at that time, but stepping back now that I think about it, Wells Fargo is a financial institution which both has consumer banking and also had commercial or merchant, business banking part. And I spent time on each side of those businesses, and it helped me gain perspective on what different product and services are offered to customers, and also how it all comes together. Right now, I am a product manager at a payments team in Braintree. If you don't know what Braintree does, Braintree is a PayPal service, and we look to provide seamless payments experience for merchants. And I'm pretty sure, even though this is like a small crowd, I'm pretty sure all of you have used the payment rails that my team would have built, because we support merchants like Uber. And if you've taken a ride with Uber, if you've booked an Airbnb, if you've bought tickets with Fandango, Ticketmaster, or any of the thousands of merchants that we support, your transactions would have gone through the payment rails that my team has built and supports. And supporting, such an impactful payment experience and supporting payments at scale is what keeps things interesting for me and what keeps me going. So one of the best things that I think a PM should have is thinking about why something needs to be done. And as all of you are here, I want to kind of, instead of just saying this is what a payments PM needs to do, I want to talk about why you should care about being a payments PM and why this matters. So this is, I don't know if you can see it clearly, not as clearly as I expected, but I did a casual search for PM jobs in payments over the weekend. And I depending on where you search and how good the search results were, I could at least see, hundreds of jobs. This is all across the U.S. and and there are some global, positions there as well. And these are across companies, very different kind of companies. These are with traditional financial institutions, like one of my ex-employers. These are with fintechs, companies that are innovating in payments. And there are also PM roles in companies that are, across different verticals that are providing commerce experiences. And if you think about it, companies that are providing commerce experiences actually want to focus on payments so that they can optimize the payment experience. And that's important because payment experience, what they see, is critical and integral to their entire customer experience and what products and services they deliver. So I would say, think about it that way, in a way that if you are a company who's providing a commerce experience, you have a user or a prospect, and until they buy your products or service, they're not your customer, right? Technically, they're still a user, a prospect that you're going after, and payment becomes that turning point, that sticky interaction that converts your user or prospect to a customer. And thinking about it that way, I mean, that's the power of making that experience really frictionless. I would say that being a PM at each one of these companies looks very different, right? Being a PM in payments in a company which is small or a company which is large, so depending on the size of the company, it's going to look very different. Depending on the culture of the company, it's going to look different, and also depending on what the goal of the product or payments organization in the company is going to be different. But there are some common characteristics. I want to talk about next about okay, so there's a demand for payment PMs. What do payments PMs really do? I've tried to kind of group it across a few different categories. So if you think about from a perspective of a company or product areas where you're building consumer financial tools, a payment PM in a company like this would focus on building the right tools for the customer. So this would be example for if you're building tools for lending, if you're building tools where you want consumers to buy your product in certain sense could be your mortgage tool, could be your small business loans, and you're revolutionizing them, making the whole experience easy. How would you compare the products? How would you treat a consumer who's applying for that product? How quickly could you decision them and provide that decision to the consumer? So that's what a PM in an organization like that would deal with. On the other side, you have companies that provide merchant acquiring and processing services. If you're a PM in one of those companies, you're looking at simplifying the payment experience for your merchant so that they can focus on what their core business is. And in that case, you're looking at processing, just how do you process payments, money movement, how are you going to move money, fraud solutions, are there intelligent way of recognizing fraud as it's happening and minimizing losses for the companies. And there are many more product areas in there as well. And bridging those is something, it's what a commerce or an e-commerce company would do. A payment PM in an e-commerce company would be looking to convert, their focus is going to be on efficiently converting their user or their product, their prospect to a customer. They would be focused on optimizing the checkout experience, making sure that when a user is presenting their payment method information, do they have the relevant payment method information at this point? So a PM in this kind of an organization would actually have their views, their eyes on both sides of these spectrum. They'd also have a good understanding or somewhat of a decent understanding of what their processors are doing for them. And they'll also have a good understanding of not just the market, but what kind of financial tools or financial instruments their consumers are going to be using. So before we kind of jump a little bit further, I want to talk about, I want to take a detour, right? This is product school. Let's do a payment school kind of a thing for like a few minutes. There are 4 different high-level categories of what payments looks like. The first is C2B, consumer to business. And this is something that you all know. This is where you're paying and buying a service from a business, buying a product from a business. Then there's B2C, the reverse of it, which is where a business is paying an individual. This is equivalent to your employer paying your salary or wages. And this is also where in gig economy, companies are paying out the gig workers. Then we have P2P, which has grown in popularity over the last few years, and PayPal and Venmo are pretty, popular, very relevant in this market. And then B2B, this is where businesses are paying businesses for service that they offer, right? As a business, you're paying your vendors, you're paying your caterers, you're paying the furnitures in this room. Let's see. Let's talk about C2B a little bit more. Some of the typical use cases in this is, we'll start with in-store. We're going to a store, buying something. E-commerce, I'll give an example, very straightforward. I'll use this example throughout the talk here. I got a hat for one of my child. That's pretty straightforward e-commerce. Card on file is where you're storing your payment method with one of your providers, and when you're using their services, you're not entering that payment method information every time. And that further removes that friction that might happen every time you go and want to pay. And lastly, recurring or subscription-based payments. This is where a typical Netflix is storing your payment method information, and without you even interacting with them, they're going to bill you for whatever the duration is that's been committed between you and the merchants. I touch upon B2C. B2B, I would like to call out, B2B is a pretty big market as well. There are $127 trillion payments that happens over B2B. But even today, B2B, a lot of those payments are still done with paper checks. And B2B involves, accounts payable organization of one company talking to account receivable, invoices being generated, invoices being mailed, being sent, and then either someone writes a check, or in the recent years, people have started using credit cards and bank payments, or ACH payments as in the US. So there's a lot of potential in B2B for digital payments. Specific to the most common form, C2B, let's talk through what a typical payment flow looks like. And I'll try to peel some layers of this complex interaction that happens. If you look at a very typical interaction, I'm looking to buy a hat. I go to a vendor. I know what kind of hat I want. I've compared competitors. I know who has the cheapest one, who has the best colors. Go to their checkout page, provide the payment details. The order is placed, and then I get the product, right? So on the left side, you have the consumer, and the right side, you have the merchant. So the consumer makes the payment. At some point, the merchant gets their payment as well. And as a consumer, as a cardholder, the company that I get my card from, the bank that I get my card from, let's say I've used my Capital One Visa card, they're going to send me a statement at the end of the billing cycle, and I'm going to pay off that purchase at that. So this is like a flow that everyone understands, right? So let's take the part between what happens when you provide your payment details and when you get that order confirmation. There's a complex set of interactions. It starts with the merchant sends your payment information to a payment processor or a payment gateway. They could be one or the same, or they could be different depending on who the players are. The payment processor takes that, knows that it's a Visa card, and sends it to the right card scheme or the card brand. So that transaction gets sent over to Visa. Visa now identifies that, hey, the card was issued by Capital One, and they identify this by something called a BIN information, which is the first 6 digits of your card is the BIN information, and they forward it to the card issuing bank. The issuing bank, so Capital One, now is going to look up Mini. They know that the transaction was from Mini, and then they're going to see if the transaction would still fit under my credit limit. If my credit limit was $100, I've purchased $40, I'm still good to go for that $10 transaction. If it was a bank account, they'll see if I still have money in my bank account to approve that. So they say, looks all good, I approve this transaction. It goes back to the scheme, it goes back to the payment processor, and in the end, it makes back into the merchant, and they say, looks all good, I know I'll get money for this transaction, I'm going to approve this order confirmed. So that's from the customer or the cardholder perspective. If you look at it from a merchant perspective, they've sent out the product. Now they need to receive the cash for the product. So how does that happen? Similar to how there is a issuing bank that works with a consumer or a cardholder, in this case, there's also a bank which works with businesses or merchants, and that's called an acquiring bank, and they provide services to the merchant, treasury services to the merchant. So in this example, breaking down the merchant side of things, Capital One, if you think, has had all these transactions that they have received for all of their cardholders. Once a day, they'll go through it, and they will collect the transactions for what's called a settlement. They'll batch the settlements by each card brand. So they'll create a separate batch for Visa, they'll create a separate batch for MasterCard, and my transaction would be included and sent to Visa in a batch. So Visa now talks to, the card scheme is Visa. The Visa now talks to the payment processor and provides them that information. The payment processor then talks, skip too soon. The payment processor then talks to the acquiring bank, and the acquiring bank at this point knows which merchant is associated with that payment. They batch out or they separate out and know that this particular hat vendor made 10 transactions, which each equal, for simplicity's sake, let's say each equals $10, and this is how much they need to be paid out at a given day. There's a lot more complexity to this. At every point of this, there are fees associated. Card issuing banks charge something called interchange fee, which really depends on the type of card you have. Is it a credit card? Is it a debit card?
So,
is it a rewards card?
What are some examples for acquiring banks?
Wells Fargo is an acquiring bank. Chase is an acquiring bank. So they also serve as issuing banks as well.
Oh.
And there are many more banks out there too. I named a couple. And then, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think I was talking about, where was I? Interchange fees, thank you. So there are different kinds of fees, and where those fees are deducted and how those fees apply to the merchant how are those fees communicated at different points in this interaction is one layer of complexity. And then there's different layers of complexity. If you are in a market where GST has to be applied to the products and services that's sold, how do you calculate tax? How do you report on tax? Those are a couple of things that I like to call out, but there's a lot of other complexities that goes on between these interactions as well. So just talking through some of these flows and kind of going back to what the payments PM in each type of these organization does, my hope is that you get a sense of how all of this comes together. If we think about tying this together with the skills that I believe a payments PM needs, being detail oriented, this really matters because as a PM in payments, you really need to understand not just what you're building, but all the different edge cases that could happen. And edge cases really matter here because payments happen at scale, either in consumer to C2B model where you have large volume of payments, but they're smaller value, right? There's large number of transactions, large number of payments, but they would be typical average ticket price could be less than 100 or so. On the other hand, you have B2B where you have comparatively small number of payment transactions, but the value of each one of those is really high. So even in both cases, you're talking about dealing with millions of transactions and millions of dollars. So even if you have an edge case where it's 1%, it only impacts 1% of your overall volume, it really matters because the 1% of imagine like 1 million transactions is pretty high. So being able to understand and ask a lot of questions iteratively and think through, how does it work? Why does it need to do something? What are competitors doing? What kind of experience could we offer in a certain aspect are key here. From an assumptions perspective, fintech and payments is just notorious for using a lot of acronyms. One of the things that I found out is just being that person, right? I've been in meetings and being like, oh, they said something about CFPB. Do I know what CFPB is? Like, oh, how do I ask them what that is? And there's two other people in the meeting who's like, I don't know about this as well. And just being like, hey, can someone please call out what this is? It's critical in payments because there's, what I've seen is that no matter how many years you have been in payments, there's just something that as you could be an expert in payments, but there are some things that you don't know and someone else knows because it's their area of expertise. So being able to validate assumptions and constantly questioning and constantly asking questions to understand details would be important.
A good question. So what's the flow from knowing what the competitor is doing to what your actions are as a PM?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What's the flow from someone finding out what the competition is doing to your actions as a PM to respond to that? What level do you respond to it? How does it affect your day-to-day as a PM?
I think it depends on the context, right? If I take my example and as a context there, as someone who's dealing with merchant experiences, understanding what other players are doing in the market enables me to understand. So when a business is going to come to me and say, hey, I need these features, understanding what someone else is doing is just what I need to do to keep up in the market, right? And it could also be like, oh, they're doing it this way, but we have a better way of doing it.
Yeah. So at what level is the appropriate response made between you and, say marketing or your managers? So who makes...
So if I could repeat the question, what level of response?
Yeah, someone's going to respond at some level. Going to decide what the response is that's appropriate to what the competition's doing.
Okay.
So how much of that is yours to make the response and how much is someone else's dedicated to?
How to decide, if I understand your question, how much do I respond or do I decide to respond to something that a competitor is doing versus what someone in marketing might do?
Yeah, so someone decides the appropriate response, right? There could be you, there could be someone else in the company. So how much is delegated to you, and how much, is stuff that someone else makes a decision about?
Again, this depends on the kind of company that you have.
Okay.
I've worked at different companies which do this very differently.
All right.
Where I work right now, a PM plays a large role in
Okay.
understanding that, and plays a large role because what's happening in the market really drives what you need to do for your product and drive the strategy forward. In my current role, a lot of that happens with PMs.
Oh, okay, that's pretty good. So you're making a lot of tactical/strategic decisions yourself.
Right.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question? So if you go just one slide before that, you have the order right here. So the order is beautifully ready to understand the whole picture, but only second empathy go beyond user empathy, develop partner empathy. In my view, you start with what customer wants, with the understanding of customer, and then you go into the whole picture and detail. Would you agree with that, or this is just not in a particular order?
I don't think this is sequential. So you made a good point. This is not sequential as to do this and do this next. And the way that I talk about user empathy is going beyond the customer, understanding what your customer wants. And I can, I'll touch upon that a little bit because, you raised a question. But from an empathy perspective, I would say it's a given that as a PM, you have an empathy and you understand what your customers' needs are, right?
Right.
So from a payments perspective, what I would say is that going beyond that, there's a lot of teams that you interact with that you're dependent on driving your product to success. And especially in payments, legal and compliance teams, you work very closely with them. And payments being a regulated industry, there's a lot of regulations. And I typically find applying empathy when you're working with groups who have very different way of looking at payments, right? If you look at someone from compliance, their primary goal is not to look at, is it going to be easy? Their primary goal is to understand what local or governmental regulations are, and if the product is meeting that needs. So I would actually think that from a payments PM perspective, you take that empathy part and you apply it to other parts of what you do as a PM as well. Does that answer your question?
Well, in part. Yes. Yeah, and following the gentleman's question, so he was asking how much decision power you have, and you answered that it depends on the company. Suppose your opinion differs from opinion of somebody who has higher decision power.
Mm-hmm.
So do you kind of maintain your opinion? Do you insist on your viewpoint? Do you make it kind of known to everybody and just wait till we'll see who actually in the end is correct or something like that? Do you kind of do you insist on your opinion? What if in the end you are correct and somebody else made wrong decision? What do you do?
I think it's still, and I would still say it still depends on the company and the kind of team that you work with. But it's, the way that I see it, it's collaborative, right? At different level, people know different things, right? When as a PM, you're working with your product very closely, you know certain details that someone maybe higher up doesn't know, right? So there could be something that I know, but there could be something that they know that they probably know the organization strategies where different parts of the organization are going much better than I know, right? So it's more of a conversation in my respect. It's not about who is right or who is wrong. It's more about a conversation and trying to figure out what information do I have and what they don't have, or the other way to think about why do we come to such decision. And I'll say this, as PMs, we do make bad decisions, right? Being PM doesn't mean that we make the right decisions all the time. PMs make that, it's not just in payments. PMs make decisions. A lot of them are good. Some of them are not good.
So you prefer a collaborative approach?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So talking more about being detailed, and then marrying that and stepping back. Like if you take that transaction processing interaction that I showed, being detailed and understanding your specific area is important, but understanding that overall payment flow is important, because without having that perspective, the product that you build for your customer is not going to meet its need. So being able to step back, being able to talk to other teams, other SMEs, and understand that specific interaction, not just one hop away from your product team, but that entire view is going to be critical to make sure that you're building products that make sense. I wanted to go back and touch on the agenda again. So we talked about why it makes sense to talk, why PMing and product is important. We looked at some models and some payment journey. And the next thing that I would like to touch upon is that, why is payments kind of a unique snowflake, and what things in payments matter? To be very candid, in some of the other product areas, all of these three things, being safe, compliant, being reliable, and having frictionless payments, these are like non-glamorous things, right? It's not about like, oh my God, the next best thing. But these three things are pretty core to what payments needs to be. The most obvious thing is in payments that we're dealing with people's money, right? And one of the most important aspects of that is to make sure that as a PM, you're building products that are secure, but also give that sense of security and safety to your consumers, to your users. And I would say that as payments PM, we shouldn't just focus on what that specific experience is. Think about the experience that someone has made before the purchase, before the payments, and think about an experience that they could do after the payment or purchase experience. So, for example, let's assume I, had fat fingers, mistakenly bought two hats. Later go to the vendor, I ask for a refund. So if you were a PM in the commerce area, you would think about, if someone can ask for a refund, can they ask for a full refund? Would they want like a partial refund? If you're someone in the merchant experience area and you do get like a refund, a refund request, if you've gotten a partial refund, I spent $20 and I'm asking for a refund of $10, what happens to the remaining $10? Thinking about it, not just from, I can give them the $10, but think about it from a perspective of, when does a $10 refund come into my bank account, right? If I used a debit card, the $10 matters a lot. It might not seem, but for different people, it might matter a lot. Even if it's a credit card, when does that appear back in my statement? Did I really, did that come back instantaneously? Would that come back 2 to 3 days later? And a lot of that depends on how you handle that refund experience. And even though it's not tied to the whole, it's just a secure payment concept, it ties to the fact that from a user's perspective, you are dealing with their money, and it's important for them to feel comfortable that when I interact with this product or service, I feel safe. I feel, I trust them. The second part of this is going to be compliance. Payments have to comply with, I said this before, there are local regulations, there are national regulations, and there's like global regulations. These are just some of the ones that I put through. Depending on which payment product area you are, you can be dealing with one or more of these. So, know your customer is basically when, you could be a bank or a financial service provider. How do you know that if I apply for a credit card, how does the bank know that it's me and not someone posing as me, or that I'm involved in a legitimate business, or that I'm not doing money laundering, I'm not doing some shady business? The financial institutions have an obligation to the government to make sure that they know who they're onboarding. There's a lot of other compliance regulations. And one of the things, I hope there's no compliance or legal people in the audience. Dealing with legal and compliance is one of the toughest things as a payments PM. Their goals of what they need a payment product to do is very different from what you as a PM would think an end user or consumer would need to do. Your focus is going to be building on the next big thing, building on really simple interactions. Their focus is going to be to make sure that the customer's interest in the bigger scheme of things are taken into account or taken into care. And also that you can prove to the government, you can prove to different regulatory bodies that you're doing the right thing as a financial institution. This is where I think that empathy comes in play. There was this one time where I was involved in a project. It seemed pretty straightforward. The product that I was involved in had to do with credit cards for a bank. And the initiative was simple. You've all seen terms and conditions that comes with credit cards, right? And the terms and conditions are posted on the issuing bank's website. And it was available in a PDF format. The initiative was take that and put that in a responsive HTML so that it renders better in different form factors. And because it involved putting the terms and conditions in a different way, slightly different way, we had to talk through legal and compliance. There were like weeks of conversations that were going on. How would this terms and condition look when they were printed? In a PDF format, when they were printed, would it look exactly the same when it would be printed if it was an HTML format? And even though there was like conversations, no, it depends on what kind of printer someone has. It depends on what kind of paper size someone has. It was like the same kind of conversation over and over again. In the end, it was, and in this case, nothing helped, right? You escalate to your leadership. They escalate to their leadership. What happens? Everyone comes together and be like, you solve it. You two need to figure out how to deliver a product that works and how to deliver a product that's that's compliant. And in the end, it was sitting down with the partners, talking through what they're looking for, understanding and digging through some of the regulations. And it's painful to read through some of the regulations. Digging through some of the regulations, understanding where their concerns were, and being able to work towards this is what ultimately solved it. And I would say that going in with the mentality, especially with compliance and regulation, is that, hey, it's not pretty, but it's there for a reason. It's there to protect us as the consumers. If you put on the consumer hat, you would want your financial institution to do the right thing and to do everything that they need to do, even if you're not aware of that. So going in with that mentality and treating, some of those regulations and the groups that enforce those regulations as your user, as your customer, is where applying that empathy to them is critical too. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't apply empathy to building products. I'm saying all of that is the baseline for being a PM, and this comes on top of it if you're in payments. So we've talked about being safe, secure, and compliant. The second part is how do you ensure that there's reliable payments, like you're providing reliable payments. I was able to grab a couple screenshots. You don't want this to happen, right? This is someone complaining on, well, this is both Twitter. This is one, the first person complaining on Twitter that they made a payment and 15 minutes later, they still haven't gotten any response. Consumers are fickle, right? They've made the decision to buy your product or service. If something like that happens, you know that you're going to take your business to someone who can provide the same service more efficiently. The same applies to, this was someone who's saying this, they couldn't access Netflix. So I'll read it for those who can. This person saying, me earlier today when I can't access Netflix because there was a payment error and my dad wouldn't give my credit card information. So, and this is the kind of experiences that you want to avoid. As a payments PM, the things that you would think about, you would care about is availability or uptime. You'd consider the latency, how soon do you let your consumers know, your customer know, if something succeeded or not. And also thinking about redundant options. If I am, if I put on a hat from a commerce or a merchant perspective, do I have, if one provider is down, do I have an option to go to another provider and still follow, still get the payment through? The last part is frictionless. And when I say frictionless, there's some part of being a payment PM where you do deal with front-end interactions. You do deal with user interactions. I would say, especially carve out customer experience separate from user experience. There's also a lot of back-end nuances to payments. So example, if you're a payments PM and you handle APIs, the way you think about a customer experience, your customers are developers, and you're thinking about how do you make your the different calls in your API, is that understandable? And you think about documentation. You think about documentation not just from a perspective of is it easy. You also think about documentation. If you don't make your documentation easy, you're going to get a lot of inbound questions. And that's the amount of time that you could be, or someone in the company could be spending doing something else. I would say that being PM and payments make you think outside of the box of what a typical product manager would, because there are a lot of these nuances. The part that I would like to touch is the learning part. Payments is very exciting because there's a lot of new things that's going on. There's a lot of new companies that are coming up. I personally believe the exciting part is also learning what some of the legacy systems do and knowing why some of these products existed and services existed the way they did and how they were built 20, 30 years ago, because some of these legacy systems and legacy products are still in place today. And learning is important for all PMs, but especially if I would say it doesn't have to be done. If you enjoy the learning process, this is really an exciting place to be in.
Are there any resources that you recommend for us to keep ourselves updated in terms of the latest state-of-the-art things in payments? And
there are a couple resources that are my go-to. There's payments.com.
Okay.
It's actually pymnts.com. And then, I look at other things. I look at TechCrunch if there's something in payments that catches my eye. And then, and I think both of these, you can turn on notifications. They'll keep bombarding you with everything on when you're browsing and stuff. There's also some podcasts. I don't remember them top of my head, but if you search for them, then there are some podcasts that you can listen as well. Lastly, the one thing I'd like to touch upon is, I get questions on, okay, this is what Payment PMs does. Do I need to have a finance background to understand payments? Do I need to have a technical background or technical experience to be, something like an API product manager? Or do I need to be in payments before? The last one's tricky. I don't know if people have experienced this. This is what happens with PMs too. They're like, hey, I want to be a PM. Well, have you done PMing before? Right? It's not, that's what some companies ask. And I've seen that being in payments as well. If you want to be in payments, there are some companies who want people who have payments experiences. But again, I say that's different from company to company. And for all of these questions, I have my favorite Michael Scott GIF. The answer is no. I don't have a financial background. Earlier this year, I learned a lot about financial reconciliation and money movement, and just used Google to understand some basic accounting principles. I do have a technical background, but I've seen a lot of other coworkers who don't have a technical background and being successful. And being able to ask those questions and just, getting a lot of those whys, what's out there is also a key to learning. And I don't personally believe, others may disagree, that you don't need a payments experience to get started in payments or to even succeed being a good PM. Before we end, I would say that I am hiring for senior PMs. So if you know someone, if you are interested, please send me your information or your resume. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can also email me at mini@getbraintree.com. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
I have a question. So regarding technical background and your experience, etc. No. But then, what about your soft skills? So being good negotiator, being empathetic, being a good team player, being able to communicate, across different teams. How much that is actually tested during interview, and how much weight it carries?
I think a lot of that is baked into a lot of the interview processes. Interview processes happen very different ways, right? Some companies give you a case study. Some companies ask you about your experiences in the past, and they'll give you certain situations. They'll say, "Oh, have you, tell me about a time where you had to disagree with a coworker, right? How did you deal about it?" So they'll ask you about those things, and those things are important, right? Being able to work, and I don't think those things are important for any PM. Being able to work, especially as a PM, you work with engineering teams, you work with marketing teams, you work with other product teams, and you work with legal and compliance teams, you work with customer service, accounts, sales, and being able to collaboratively work together and bring them all together, and being able to communicate why you're doing something is going to be important. So soft skills are, in my opinion, equally important, and when you consider some of the hard skills.
And they are tested during interview.
Yes.
What about your decision-making skills? If you just, agreeable, then, are you capable of making your own informed decision despite maybe disagreements?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. There are organizations where I've been like, well, I disagree with them, and they're like, I don't care about what you disagree with, this is what you're gonna do, right? And then there are organizations where your opinion is heard. You have a discussion about why you disagree, why do you think something else matters, and what they believe doesn't matter. And everyone likes to believe we're doing it together. And when we're doing it together, at some level, someone has to make the decision. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's someone else.
So I want to go back to the legal story that you mentioned about the HTML versus the PDF format. And so then, when you went back to the table after the organization leadership had agreed, and you went back to the whiteboard, did you literally worked on read the legal documentation to interpret it? How did you that? Because that documentation, lawyers can understand that, or legal people can understand well.
Right.
But to make them sometimes they can really get adamant, and then either you go into their language and read the documentation and then get back. How do you,
that's one of the examples. In that case, and this happened years ago. So in that case, I think I did read the regulation and asked them, hey, which particular part of this is concerning to you? Why is this concerning to you? If that was concerning to you, this is what we're doing today. How would you apply that and to the current situation that we're doing? Or tell me what you're I understand that you're concerned about this, what we've built, and how, if this is compliant or not. What do you need to see for me to say that I have built this in a compliant way and this meets the regulation? Or help me understand what the regulation is. In some cases, the regulations have been in a foreign language. And even though they say, oh, I'll send you the regulations, it is really long document, it's in a foreign language, and even with Google Translate, you're it's unreadable. So there are various strategies. You can spend some time reading it. But you the best thing is to kind of go deeper with those people as well and try to understand what they're really looking for.
You spoke about the different types of payments that are there, like the credit card payment and things like that, especially on C2B. There's also one more, which is the gift card, or say a loyalty card, or the Clipper card that we use, where the payments company is actually charging the merchant a higher fee in a way, and
So I'm just curious to understand how does that payment journey work, such that the merchant is willing to part away with like a larger share in those kind of cases.
So if I
Would you-
understand, if you're talking about gift cards,
Yeah, so I think I'd put gift cards, loyalty cards, any kind of prepaid cards, or even Quiver for that matter, in the same category where, say, your usual ride is going to be $3, but if you have a Clipper card, then that becomes $2.50, and that 50 cents is literally going from the merchant's pocket.
so there are different kinds of, depending on what the merchant's trying to do. There could be different things that's happening there. The merchant is either trying to attract a certain kind of business and being willing to pass, like it's like a promotional thing, right? And they're willing to take on that hit for a short time and say, oh, I want these kind of cards. I want to make it sticky so that these people come over and over again. There could also be sometimes merchants who have large volumes would also have certain contracts with banks or with like Visa, MasterCards. And when that happens, for those certain cases, how much they actually pay for those transactions would actually be a lower negotiated amount. So depending on what's really going on there could be many different reasons of why there's different kind of fees are being applied to.
What do you see as like an interesting industry in the payments industry that's upcoming and exciting and innovative, and you're like, what do you see that's upcoming that we should be aware of?
I would say Braintree, but we're already there. So I would be cheating if I said that. I think there's a lot of companies. There are companies that are trying to do, there are companies that are trying to do new business models, right? I know companies that are dealing in B2B space a lot. I don't have certain names to share, but I think that the differentiator or interesting things are going to happen where it's not something that's happening in the same model. So if we think about it in the last few years, we've seen so many companies that are using subscription model, right? And so the next thing is going to come from someone who's just not going to, who's going to do something differently. That's not what's been done with payments before. Alrighty, thank you.